In the cold, endless stretches of space, the Xenarith Empire had ruled supreme for centuries, feared by all who encountered their vast armadas. Known for their technological superiority and ruthless tactics, they were a force few dared to challenge. But now, something was different. A strange anomaly had been detected in the outer rim of their territory, an unknown warship, moving silently and undetected by their advanced sensors. The Xenarith military had long prided itself on its dominance over the stars, but this was a new kind of threat, something they could not explain. The warship appeared out of nowhere, its sleek, almost organic design unlike anything they had ever seen. Its movements were fluid, almost graceful, but precise in a way that made the Xenarith uneasy. Every maneuver seemed calculated, like the ship was alive, breathing with purpose. Despite their best efforts, their sensors could not lock onto it. The ship was cloaked in a stealth system so advanced that it seemed to mock their technology. The warship's presence signaled something that sent ripples of unease through the Xenarith fleet. Humanity had arrived. It was a species they had only heard whispers about. Humans, a race not known for their power, yet capable of surviving against impossible odds. The Xenarith Empire had never encountered them directly, but the rumors of their strength and resilience had always lingered in the darker corners of the galaxy. The time for rumors was over. The humans were here, and they were not coming quietly. Captain Korath, a seasoned warlord and leader of the Xenarith fleet, was not one to be easily rattled. He had crushed countless rebellions and defeated enemy forces that had once seemed unbeatable. The Xenarith had always prided themselves on their superiority, and Korath had never doubted that their military prowess was unmatched. But as he sat in the command center of his flagship, staring at the data screens, something gnawed at him. There was a tension in the air, a feeling that his fleet was facing something entirely different from anything they had encountered before. The unknown warship had not opened fire, nor had it taken any aggressive actions, but its very presence was a challenge that Korath could not ignore. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered, his voice steady but sharp. "We will hunt down this shadow, and we will show these humans that they are nothing compared to the Xenarith Empire." He trusted in his fleet's strength. After all, they had crushed entire civilizations with ease. Yet, as he gave the order to mobilize, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. The humans were uncharted territory, and Korath couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would be unlike any other. The Xenarith warships moved in perfect formation, their weapon systems ready for battle, but even as they advanced, they could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. The strange warship continued to slip through their defenses like a shadow, always staying just out of reach. The crew of the Xenarith ships began to murmur among themselves, voices hushed with uncertainty. Their sensors could not penetrate the ship's cloaking system, and their weapons fire had no effect on the sleek vessel. The humans, it seemed, were playing a different game. And for the first time in Korath's career, his confidence began to waver. As the minutes passed, the atmosphere aboard the flagship grew tense, every officer on edge, wondering what their next move should be. "Captain, we have not detected any hostile action from the enemy ship," one of his officers reported, his voice betraying the confusion in his tone. "It appears to be waiting." Korath stood up, pacing slowly in front of the large view screen, his eyes scanning the starry expanse. There was something in the way the human ship lingered in the distance, patient, calculating. It was not running, nor was it attacking. It was observing. Korath's mind raced. What kind of enemy waits to strike? The idea unsettled him. It was unlike anything he had faced. The Xenarith were a species of action. They conquered, they destroyed, they ruled. But this enemy, whoever they were, seemed to have no need for such methods. The humans were not rushing in for battle. Instead, they were letting the Xenarith make the first move. And that realization struck Korath like a blow. He had underestimated them. Now, as he stood on the bridge, staring into the void where the human ship hovered, he realized that this was no ordinary enemy. The humans were here, and they had come to challenge everything the Zenarith Empire stood for. The warship's silence was deafening. The waiting game had begun. As the Zenarith fleet moved closer to the mysterious human warship, the cold, starless void suddenly seemed to tremble. From the shadow of a dead star, the enemy ship emerged, its design unlike anything the Zenarith had ever seen. The hull of the ship was dark, almost living, with organic curves that gave the impression that it could breathe. Its surface shimmered slightly as though it were a part of the cosmos itself, blending seamlessly with the void around it. There was something unsettlingly graceful about it, like a predator waiting patiently in the dark. The Zenarith ships, which had been designed for the sole purpose of overpowering all who dared to challenge them, now found themselves facing an unknown force, a force they could not understand. Captain Korath, still confident in his fleet's overwhelming might, ordered his ships to engage. The Zenarith warships unleashed their weapons, unleashing a torrent of deadly energy beams and projectiles aimed at the human ship. But to their shock, the attacks had no effect. The energy beams simply bounced off the ship's shields, leaving no trace, as if the human vessel were wrapped in an impenetrable force field. The Zenarith gunners, stunned by the failure of their weapons, tried again and again, but nothing seemed to make a dent. The human ship didn't even seem to be trying to avoid the blasts. It simply absorbed them, like it was indifferent to their presence. It was as if the ship were alive, moving with purpose and calm, undeterred by the chaos unfolding around it. As the battle continued, a deep, unsettling silence descended over the Zenarith fleet. The humans had not fired a single shot in retaliation, yet the atmosphere felt charged with tension. Korath, refusing to admit that the humans might have something they didn't understand, pressed on. He barked orders to continue the assault, but there was something gnawing at the edges of his mind. The humans weren't afraid. They were not fleeing or counterattacking. They were simply there, watching, waiting. It wasn't long before the eerie quiet was shattered by a single transmission. A message came through on every Zenarith ship's communication system. The voice that came through was calm, almost eerily so, but it held a weight that made the hairs on the back of every officer's neck stand on end. "We are the human race," the voice said, slow and deliberate. "You have trespassed on our path. Leave or face the consequences." Korath felt a chill run down his spine as the words echoed in his mind. The message was simple, almost too simple. But there was an undercurrent in the voice that suggested more than just a threat. There was certainty. The Zenarith were no strangers to threats, and they had heard many. But there was something about this transmission that was different. The human voice did not tremble, nor did it demand. It simply stated the facts. The humans knew who they were, and they knew what they could do. It wasn't a warning. It was a statement of power. Korath laughed it off, trying to shake off the unease creeping into his chest. It had to be a bluff. The humans, whoever they were, had no idea who they were dealing with. He was Captain Korath, the conqueror of worlds, the destroyer of empires. His fleet had crushed enemies far more powerful than anything this mysterious race could possibly offer. The humans were weak, and they would soon learn their place in the galaxy, beneath the Zenarith heel. But despite his laughter, Korath couldn't ignore the feeling in the pit of his stomach. The transmission wasn't like any he had received before. There was no arrogance in the voice, no bravado, just a cold, unshakable certainty that sent a wave of doubt through his mind. For the first time in years, he felt a growing sense of fear, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a young soldier, unsure of his place in the vast universe. The Zenarith were not used to being warned. In all his years of warfare, Korath had never encountered an enemy that didn't either flee or fight back immediately. But these humans, whoever they were weren't behaving like any other species. They weren't running, nor were they preparing for some grand offensive. They were simply waiting. And that, more than anything, unsettled Korath. It was a new kind of war, one where the rules didn't apply, and that thought gnawed at his mind. The Xenarith had conquered for centuries, but now, for the first time in a long while, Korath felt a seed of doubt sprouting within him. Could these humans truly be something more than he had ever anticipated? Could they actually be capable of defeating the unstoppable Xenarith Empire? As the seconds ticked by, Korath realized that he had underestimated the enemy, and that mistake might be the last he ever made. Captain Korath's grip tightened on the command chair as the human ship, still lurking on the edge of the battlefield, seemed to taunt the Xenarith fleet. The humans had warned them, and now it was too late. There would be no retreat. Korath had made up his mind. He would crush this mysterious enemy, just as he had crushed all others. Without a moment's hesitation, he ordered a full-scale attack, sending waves of Xenarith warships toward the human vessel. His fleet, though massive and powerful, was about to meet something entirely unexpected. As the Xenarith ships surged forward, their weapons blazing, the humans made no immediate move to defend themselves. It was almost as if they were inviting the attack. But then, the humans did something that Korath had not anticipated. They fought back with an almost unnatural precision. The human warships, though fewer in number, moved with such unpredictable grace that they seemed to slip through the chaos of battle, dodging blasts and weaving between the lines of fire from the Xenarith fleet. Each time a Xenarith warship fired, the humans responded, striking with uncanny accuracy at weak points in the enemy's hulls. It was as though they could predict every move the Xenarith made. Korath watched, stunned, as his ships were slowly and systematically dismantled. The humans' tactics were unlike anything he had ever seen. His fleet, once the pinnacle of military power in the galaxy, was now being outmaneuvered at every turn. The Xenarith ships were large, heavily armored, and powerful, but they were not nimble. They relied on their sheer strength to overwhelm opponents, but the humans didn't engage in traditional head-to-head combat. Instead, they used speed, agility, and an almost intimate knowledge of how to counter every weapon the Xenarith unleashed. The Xenarith fleet, for the first time in centuries, found itself scrambling to defend. Ships that had once been proud symbols of invincibility were now sinking under the onslaught of the human warships. Every time Korath thought he had the upper hand, another human ship would appear from the shadows, launching a new barrage of strikes. His warships couldn't track the enemy fast enough. The Xenarith had built their empire through strength, yet now it was their strength that was being torn apart by the human force. But it wasn't just the humans' technological advancements that made them so formidable. Korath began to realize, as he watched the battlefield unfold, that the humans fought with a purpose deeper than any strategy or weapon. They fought not just to survive, but because they would not be dominated, would not be crushed by the weight of any empire. There was a unity to their attack, a strength that came from a shared resolve. Their warships weren't just ships. They were symbols of something much greater. Korath could feel it in the pulse of their attacks, in the way their ships moved. Together, always one step ahead, always unpredictable. Then, as Korath's flagship struggled to hold its position, something caught his eye. The lead human warship, the one that had orchestrated the devastating blows against his fleet, came into view again. It had a large, powerful emblem emblazoned across its hull, an eagle soaring in defiance. Korath's gaze fixed on it, and, for the first time, he felt an unfamiliar sensation stir within him, a sense of something he could not name. That eagle, that symbol, seemed to stand for more than just the humans. It stood for hope. Hope? Korath thought. How could hope be so strong? How could these fragile beings, these humans, be the source of something that could unravel the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. As the battle raged on, the Xenarith fleet began to break apart, and Korath, in the midst of the chaos, found himself asking a question he had never thought to ask before. What if the humans were right? What if they weren't just fighting to survive, but to build something that could endure forever? It was a thought that shook him to his core, but there was no time to dwell on it. The battle was far from over, and Korath still had one final weapon at his disposal. But as he watched the human ships circle his fleet with relentless determination, something told him that victory would not be as simple as he had once believed. The humans had ignited a fire in him that Korath couldn't put out. And now, with his forces crumbling around him, he was beginning to understand. This was more than just a battle. This was the beginning of something far bigger than anyone had imagined. The battle had been unfolding in ways Captain Korath never could have predicted. The Xenarith fleet, once the terror of the stars, was now on the defensive. His warships, though powerful, were being dismantled with terrifying precision by the human forces. Korath, his heart pounding, recognized the gravity of the situation. His initial confidence had slowly turned to dread as the human warships continued to outmaneuver and overpower his fleet. The humans weren't just surviving, they were thriving, using tactics and technology that were beyond anything the Xenarith had ever encountered. Realizing that his forces were on the verge of collapse, Korath issued a command for retreat. The Xenarith ships began to pull back, their once proud formation disintegrating as they scattered to avoid further destruction. Yet, even as they attempted to flee, the human fleet pressed on, relentless in their pursuit. The humans were not giving an inch. They were closing in, ensuring that the Xenarith could not escape unscathed. But the most shocking moment came when the human warships began to unveil their true power. Korath watched in disbelief as small, agile strike crafts launched from the human ships. These craft were fast, so fast that they seemed to be everywhere at once. They darted in and out of his fleet, weaving through the Xenarith defenses with deadly accuracy. Their maneuverability was unmatched, and every strike was calculated, leaving no room for error. Korath had thought that the humans relied only on their larger ships, but now he realized that they had a different kind of power, one based on flexibility, speed, and sheer unpredictability. And it wasn't just the strike craft that were causing devastation. The humans' weapons, which Korath had once dismissed as primitive, now proved to be far more advanced than he could have imagined. Every shot they fired hit with terrifying precision, and their energy pulses tore through Xenarith, shields like they were made of paper. Korath's once dominant fleet was crumbling. His ships, designed to withstand enemy fire, were being torn apart by weapons that seemed far beyond the reach of any race the Xenarith had ever encountered. The humans were not just technologically advanced. They had evolved their approach to warfare in ways that Korath could not understand, and it was making all the difference. As the retreat became a desperate flight, Korath stood on the bridge of his flagship, his eyes scanning the chaotic battlefield. His forces were now scattered, many already destroyed, and the remaining ships were struggling to regroup. He knew that the Xenarith were facing defeat, but as he prepared to make his final transmission, a question gnawed at him. Who were these? Humans? How had they managed to turn the tables so quickly? How could such a young race, one so seemingly insignificant in the grand scale of the galaxy, be capable of so much? Finally, with a sense of helplessness he had never known before, Korath activated the communication systems. His voice, once filled with the confident authority of a warlord, now trembled with uncertainty. "Who are you, humans?" he asked, his words laced with a mix of frustration and awe. "We were the greatest empire in the galaxy. How can you defeat us so easily?" The response came through without hesitation, as calm and steady as the first transmission had been. It was a voice that resonated with unwavering resolve. "We are the human race," the commander replied, each word ringing with a strength Korath had never heard before. We endure, we adapt, we rise, and we do not fall. The words echoed in Korath's mind, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never felt before: fear. The Zenarith had conquered worlds, crushed empires, and dominated all who crossed their path. They were unstoppable, or so they believed. But now, facing this mysterious human force, Korath was beginning to question everything. The humans did not fight with the same mindless hunger for domination that the Zenarith had. No, the humans fought with something else, something deeper. It was their will to endure, their ability to adapt, and most terrifying of all, their unyielding belief that they would never be defeated. Korath stood frozen, his mind reeling as the transmission ended. The once unshakable captain, who had commanded fear and respect for so long, now felt a gnawing unease at the pit of his stomach. What if humanity truly is unstoppable? The thought whispered in his mind, chilling him to the bone. The human race, so young, so small in the grand scheme of things, had shown the Zenarith something far greater than technology or military might. They had shown them the power of spirit, the unshakable force of resolve and unity that no army could ever truly defeat. As the Zenarith ships retreated into the darkness of space, the weight of this realization settled on Korath's shoulders. The war had only just begun, and already the humans had shown they were not the prey. They were the hunters. In the wake of the disastrous defeat at the hands of the human fleet, the Zenarith Empire was left stunned, its pride shattered. The once feared warlord Korath, who had believed in the invincibility of his people, now found himself facing a future full of uncertainty. The empire, built on centuries of conquest and domination, was in disarray. The humans, those small and seemingly insignificant beings, had shown the Zenarith something they had never seen before: an indomitable will to fight, an unbreakable spirit that could not be crushed. The defeat was not just military, it was psychological. The Zenarith had lost more than just ships. They had lost their confidence, and with it, the illusion of their superiority. Yet, as Korath and the surviving members of his fleet struggled to regroup, a shift began to happen. One that would change the course of the war. At first it was small, a few whispers here and there among the Zenarith ranks. But soon the disillusionment spread. Soldiers, once loyal to the Empire's cause, began to question everything they had fought for. The arrogant superiority of their leaders, their endless conquests, their cold disregard for other species, they began to see it all differently. How could they continue to fight for an empire that had shown itself so vulnerable, so fragile against a force that was smaller, but fiercer than anything they had ever encountered? And how could they ignore the truth that had become glaringly apparent? The human spirit was something far stronger than they had ever imagined. One by one, Zenarith soldiers and even high-ranking officials began to defect. They made their way to hidden planets on the fringes of the Empire, far from the reach of their former comrades. It wasn't just fear of defeat that drove them. It was the undeniable strength they had witnessed in the humans. Despite the humans' smaller numbers and their relative youth as a species, they had stood firm. They had fought not just with their weapons, but with their hearts, driven by something deeper than mere survival, by a will to resist tyranny and oppression. On a remote, uncharted planet, a group of these defectors, once powerful warriors in the Zenarith Empire, gathered in secret with a human envoy. The meeting took place under the cover of darkness, hidden from the prying eyes of the Zenarith loyalists who might still seek to track them down. The defectors spoke of their disillusionment, of the emptiness they felt after years of serving an empire that had abandoned any pretense of honor or justice. They spoke of the horrors they had witnessed, the cruelty they had been forced to inflict upon other civilizations in the name of conquest. And now, They were ready to make a choice that would define the rest of their lives, to join the humans in their fight, to stand against the Zenareth Empire and all it represented. The human envoy, a calm and resolute commander, listened intently. There was no hesitation in the offer they extended. The humans would protect them, offer them a place among their forces, and in exchange, they would share their knowledge and experience of the Zenareth. The message was clear. Humanity was not just another force in the galaxy. They were something more. They were the spark of hope for those who had been oppressed, the flame that would light the way for the galaxy's rebels, the unifying force for those who had been broken by tyranny. The humans didn't just fight for survival, they fought to inspire others to rise, to stand against the darkness that had consumed so many. As the defectors pledged their allegiance to the humans, a new kind of power began to emerge from the ashes of war. The alliance between the Zenareth defectors and the human forces was more than just a military partnership. It was the beginning of a revolution. For the first time in centuries, the Zenareth Empire was not the unchallenged ruler of the stars. The human race, once considered an insignificant speck in the vastness of space, had become the symbol of defiance. They were no longer the underdogs. They were the catalysts for change, the leaders of a movement that would spread like wildfire across the galaxy. News of this new alliance soon spread through the galaxy, carried by whispers and coded transmissions. Other oppressed worlds, some far beyond the Zenareth Empire's reach, began to take notice. Rebellions began to stir. Systems that had long been under the heel of the Zenareth saw in the humans not just a new hope, but a rallying cry. The human spirit, proven on the battlefield, had become the emblem of resistance. Korath, still reeling from the devastating defeat, was unaware of the full extent of the changes that were taking place in the galaxy. He could still hear the echoes of the human commander's words in his mind. We endure, we adapt, we rise, and we do not fall. Those words had sparked something in him, something he hadn't expected. But now, as the news of humanity's growing alliance with the disillusioned Zenareth spread, Korath knew that the galaxy was changing. The balance of power was shifting, and for the first time in a long while, the Zenareth no longer held the upper hand. Humanity's fight for freedom had become a beacon, and the flames of revolution were spreading. The Zenareth Empire, once the unchallenged overlord of the galaxy, was beginning to crumble. Word of their devastating defeat at the hands of the human fleet spread like wildfire, igniting fires of rebellion across the Empire's vast territory. What had once been a unified force, feared and respected by all, was now splintering into factions. The mighty Zenareth fleet, which had once crushed any opposition without hesitation, found itself divided. Old alliances were fraying, and the once loyal commanders began to question the authority of the High Council that had led them to such a disastrous defeat. As planets that had long been under Zenareth control began to rise up, emboldened by the humans' victory, the Empire's hold on its territories began to slip. Systems that had been held in fear for centuries were now shaking free of their chains, inspired by the message the humans had sent to the galaxy, that oppression could be overthrown. In the heart of the Zenareth capital, paranoia took root. The leaders who had once stood at the helm of the Empire now turned on one another, each blaming the other for the failure to crush the human threat. Accusations flew in the halls of power, and fear gripped those who had once been untouchable. The cracks that had begun to appear after the loss to the humans now spread like a disease, infecting every corner of the Empire. Old grudges were revived, and power-hungry generals, once loyal to the Empire, now saw an opportunity to seize control. This internal strife would prove to be the Empire's undoing. A civil war erupted within the Zenareth leadership, and the once mighty Empire found itself at war with itself, tearing apart from the inside out. Amidst this chaos, the human fleet, now stronger than ever, prepared for its final push. The humans had rallied support from the defectors within the Xenarith ranks, as well as from the slaves and oppressed peoples from the many conquered worlds that had suffered under the Xenarith's rule. These new allies, many of whom had been broken by years of tyranny, now stood tall and resolute, united under the banner of freedom and resistance. The human fleet had grown exponentially, not just in size, but in strength and resolve. The warriors from every corner of the galaxy who had once been crushed by the Xenarith were now fighting alongside the humans, determined to see their former oppressors brought to justice. The message was clear. The time for the Xenarith Empire's reign of fear and conquest was over. Humanity was no longer the underdog, no longer the small, insignificant species that had been underestimated and ignored. The humans had proven that their strength lay not just in their advanced technology, but in their unyielding will to fight for what was right. They had shown the galaxy what true strength looked like, the strength of a people who would not be broken, who would rise again no matter how many times they were knocked down. The human fleet, now bolstered by an army of allies, set its sights on the heart of the Xenarith Empire, the capital. The battle ahead would be fierce, but the humans were ready. They had come this far, and there would be no turning back. The Xenarith leaders, preoccupied with their infighting, failed to notice the gathering storm until it was almost too late. The human fleet was already moving, its warships cutting through the galaxy with terrifying speed and precision. With every system they passed, more and more planets joined their cause, swelling their ranks and bolstering their resolve. As the human ships moved closer to the capital, they sent a final message to the Xenarith leadership. Your time is over. The oppressed will rise and humanity will lead the charge. We are coming, and there is nothing you can do to stop us. The Xenarith leaders, now consumed by their own desperation, scrambled to regroup, but it was clear to them that their empire was already lost. The humans had shown them that no empire, no matter how vast, could stand when the people it oppressed rose up. The final assault on the capital was imminent, and with it, the end of the Xenarith's reign. The galaxy was on the brink of a new era, one where the powerful no longer held the universe in fear, but where the oppressed, the downtrodden, and the forgotten would finally have a chance to take control of their own destinies. Humanity had proven that the greatest strength was not in domination, but in standing together, rising as one against tyranny. And now, the Xenarith Empire would feel the full weight of that truth. The final battle had arrived. The coalition of human forces, strengthened by the defection of Xenarith soldiers and the oppressed from countless worlds, now gathered at the doorstep of the Xenarith capital. The once mighty Xenarith Empire, now fractured by internal strife and weakened by the relentless push of the humans, could do little to halt the oncoming storm. Their once pristine citadels, symbols of an empire that had ruled with fear for centuries, now stood as crumbling monuments to their arrogance. As human warships filled the skies and strike crafts weaved through the chaos below, the Xenarith realized, too late, that they were no longer the apex predators of the galaxy. Their time had passed. Captain Korath, the warlord who had once been the embodiment of the Xenarith Empire's might, now stood as a shadow of his former self. His confidence had evaporated, replaced by a grim resignation. His fleet, decimated, and in disarray, was no match for the unified forces now attacking his capital. Korath had watched his empire tear itself apart in a brutal civil war, and now, in the face of humanity's unrelenting advance, he knew there was no hope left. The battle had already been lost before it even began, and yet he couldn't bring himself to abandon the fight. With a fierce, almost bitter determination, Korath rallied his remaining forces for one last desperate stand. He would defend his home, whatever it took. But even as Korath ordered his ships into position, he could feel it in his bones. The unstoppable force of humanity was bearing down on them. The humans, once thought weak and insignificant, had proven their strength in ways no one could have predicted. They fought not just with their weapons, but with a resolve that was unlike anything the Zenareth had ever faced. It wasn't just a war. They were fighting for freedom, for justice, for the right to exist without fear. Korath's forces, already on the brink of collapse, were swiftly overwhelmed by the human onslaught. No matter how fiercely they fought, they could not halt the tide of progress and hope that surged forward. As the battle raged on, the Zenareth capital began to fall. The towering citadels, once symbols of the Empire's might, now crumbled under the weight of the human assault. Explosions rocked the city, sending shockwaves through the streets as human forces moved methodically through the ruins, dismantling the heart of the Empire. The zenith of the Zenareth's cruelty and oppression, their final bastion of power, was now being erased from existence. And with each passing moment, the Zenareth Empire became a distant memory, its hold over the galaxy slipping into the past. Korath stood alone on the bridge of his flagship, watching in silence as his world disintegrated around him. His once proud fleet, shattered and scattered, was no more. His empire, which had stood unchallenged for so long, was now in its death throes. There was nothing left to protect, nothing left to fight for. As the last remnants of his forces were overrun, Korath realized the truth. Humanity was the future, and the Zenareth were nothing more than a fading shadow. He had been a part of something that was destined to fail, and then, as the dust of the battle settled, it was over. The Zenareth Empire had fallen. The human forces, having liberated countless worlds and toppled the ancient empire, stood victorious. The galaxy, once under the iron grip of the Zenareth, was now free. The humans, who had once been seen as insignificant, had proven that they were more than capable of changing the course of history. They had risen not just to defeat their enemies, but to forge a new future for the oppressed. The legacy of the Zenareth, built on fear and domination, had been erased, and a new era was dawning, one where the voices of the forgotten could finally be heard. The final transmission from humanity echoed across the stars, a message that would resonate through the cosmos for generations to come. We are the human race. We do not surrender. We do not fear. And we will rise again, no matter the cost. These words, simple yet powerful, captured the essence of everything humanity had stood for. No matter the challenges, no matter the enemies, humanity would rise. They would never be silenced. They would never be broken. And as the ruins of the Zenareth capital smoldered in the background, the galaxy knew one undeniable truth. The human race had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again.